Hello, this is Representative Pam Powers Hanley. Welcome to my podcast, A View from the Left Side. For many years in the Arizona House, my seat was on the far left side of the chamber. As a progressive Democrat and one of the most independent representatives in the House, I always believed that was a fitting seat for me. This podcast features in-depth interviews with newsmakers from all walks of life, as well as political and social commentary. Thanks for joining me on the left side today. Now it's time for some good trouble. This week's A View from the Left Side commentary. This week's podcast was recorded during the week of August 23rd, 2021. The 2021 legislative session was very grueling for many people, particularly the Democratic women. It was the longest session in many years, almost 5.5 months of session. Why was it so grueling? Because of the 2020 election. Democrats had hoped that we would take the legislature, or at least one house of the legislature, in the 2020 election. But the legislature remains at the same split, with 29 Democrats and 31 Republicans in the House. The difference is that the new Republicans who came in 2020 are far more extreme and more libertarian than most of the people that they replaced. Their policies are so extreme, and that can be seen in the legislation that we heard in 2021 and that was passed. There was a lot of bipartisanship in 2021 because the more reasonable bills, like, for example, taking federal money to pay for child care subsidies for the poor, those were bipartisan votes because all the libertarians pretty much voted no. The Democrats voted yes, with some of the more reasonable Republicans. They needed us to pass common sense things. But when it came to extreme legislation in 2021, the Republicans held together. And that is the crux of today's podcast. We warned them that they would get sued, and we warned them that citizens would take the streets against the bills that they passed. And now, at the end of August, that is exactly what's going on. There are 6 referenda that are being circulated for signatures right now. Half of them are related to public education funding and the tax cuts that were designed to get rid of the Prop 208 fee. And the other half of those referenda are aimed at the voter suppression bills that the Republicans passed. The voters never said they wanted Republicans to take away our right to vote. And furthermore, the voters did say in 2020 that they wanted a fee on the richest Arizonans that would pay for public education. And what did the Republicans do? They passed a slew of voter suppression bills, and they passed a slew of tax cuts primarily for the rich. Today's show focuses on the citizens of Arizona taking to the streets to get signatures to stop these bad bills from becoming law. So you'll hear a lot about action today in favor of public education and also in favor of protecting our voting rights in the state of Arizona. So one thing I am thankful for today is that the progressives who wrote the Constitution of the state of Arizona were smart enough to trust the people of Arizona and to put the referendum process and the citizens' initiative process into our Constitution. That way, when the Arizona government does things that we don't like, we can stop them at the ballot box. If these referendum get enough signatures by September 28, they will go on the 2022 ballot for the people to decide, not for a handful of Republicans to decide. In 2021, the Republican Party in the legislature acted as if they had a supermajority and a mandate. What they actually had was a razor-thin one-vote majority. That is not enough to pass this extreme legislation. So, stay tuned. We have two guests today who are going to talk about the 6 referenda, how you can get involved, where you can put your signature, and how you can help save democracy and public education in the state of Arizona. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is David Luhan. He's president and CEO of the Children's Action Alliance and former director of the Center for Arizona Progress. He was also a minority leader in the Arizona House many years ago, and he's done some good trouble since he's been out working with the Arizona Center for Progress and educating us legislators on what's going on with children and poverty-related issues in the state of Arizona. There are 6 referenda that are trying to get on the 2022 ballot, and you're going to talk about the 3 that are related to education today. Could you give us a little bit more about the background on why the citizens of Arizona have to go out and collect signatures for this?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This is great. I appreciate it. And thank you for being such a great champion in the legislature. The legislature going into this year had a $2 billion revenue surplus, ongoing revenue surplus, which means $2 billion that we could use to invest in a whole number of different things going forward. I've been around the legislature for many years. If you ask a lot of people who have been around the legislature for a long time, they will all say that they can never recall any time in the past when we've had such a large revenue surplus that could be used for a whole lot of different opportunities. And I think one of the big reasons why we had such a huge surplus was because of the past year and all the federal stimulus dollars. And I think there's a lot of that federal dollars that went into building up the state revenue coffers because people were getting their stimulus checks. Not everybody was impacted negatively by the economic downturn as some. And so some people were using those stimulus checks to go out and they were buying things, particularly buying things online. And that really boosted our state revenue coffers to the extent of having this $2 billion surplus going forward. The legislature had a lot of opportunities, and we could have used that $2 billion to invest in children's health care. We have the 4th lowest number of children that are covered by health insurance in the country. It would have just taken a $12 million investment to increase children's health care coverage by thousands, but that didn't happen. We could have invested in higher education, not only K-12 education, but higher education has seen some of the largest cuts in the country over the past decade. We could have invested in affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund was almost depleted a decade ago and has never been restored. We could have invested in K-12 education, so many other things. But yet what happened is instead of investing that $2 billion in Arizona and in the people of this state so that they have better economic opportunities for everyone, instead what our legislature did is they passed a $2 billion tax cut or a combination of tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the richest Arizonans. And basically gave away all $2 billion of that revenue surplus in the form of those tax cuts. And so to give you an idea of how lopsided those tax cuts were, 90% of the tax cuts will go to the top 20% of the wealthiest Arizonans. If you are in that top 1% of Arizona's wealthiest, you're going to get an average tax cut of about $35,000 a year. But if you're a family making $80,000 a year, you're going to get a $35 tax cut. That's what was at stake this session. Those are the missed opportunities that we saw, is that rather than using that $2 billion to invest in our future as a state, they gave it away. And that gives away our future because, as you know, when we pass tax cuts, it only takes a simple majority of the legislature to pass a tax cut. But to reverse it later, to try and raise revenue in the legislature, it takes a 2/3 vote of both chambers and the governor's signature. It takes a supermajority vote, something that's only been done once in the last 30 years. So once a tax cut passes, it's virtually impossible to reverse it. The only way really to do it is what we are doing now, and that's through a referendum, and which means we basically have 90 days from the end of the legislative session to go out and collect signatures, about 118,000 valid signatures between now and September 28th. And if we can do that, if we can get those signatures, it will immediately stop those tax cuts from going into effect until the November 22 elections. And then voters of Arizona will have an opportunity to vote whether they think these are tax cuts that should go forward, or if they vote them down, that will stop the tax cuts from ever going into effect. And then the new legislature that we elect, when they come in January 23, will then have that revenue again to decide whether they want to invest it in our communities or what they want to do with it. So that's what's at stake. It really is about whether we are going to have the revenue going forward to invest in education, children's healthcare, housing, all the things that I think so many Arizonans care about.
Definitely, Arizonans care about funding education, and they were pretty upset with the Republicans when they were passing these things during the session in 2021. Democrats fought hard against them, but, even with their slim majority, they were able to keep their people together to vote in lockstep. Some of these referenda, or at least one of them, isn't it specifically targeted at the bills that would basically nullify the funding from Prop 208? Isn't that correct?
Yes. So 2 of the 3 bills are the subject of these referendums are specifically targeted towards reducing the revenue that Prop 208 can collect. One of them is Senate Bill 1783. This is a direct attack on Proposition 208. And might I add, the 1.7 million Arizona voters who voted to pass Prop 208, who voted to raise revenue to increase funding for our public schools. And what this bill does is it gives certain people that are in that wealthiest 1% the ability to work around the tax surcharge so that they can avoid it. And what one example is through their trusts and estates. So a lot of wealthy individuals put their wealth into trusts and estates, and they draw down income from that. Up until now, that income is taxed under the individual income tax brackets. But what they are trying to do is give these wealthy filers the ability to have an alternative means of filing taxes on that trust and estate income. So it takes it out of the individual income tax code and thereby takes it out of being subject to the Prop 208 surcharge. The only reason to do that is to make it so that they can avoid paying the Prop 208 surcharge and reduce the amount of revenue that Prop 208 can raise for our public schools. So it does that for trusts and estates. And it also does it for these wealthy individuals who get some of their income from businesses that they may own. So the opponents, the legislators who put this out said, well, we're just trying to make sure that no business is going to get taxed by Prop 208, which is probably the biggest myth that was put forward during the campaign last year. And I'll just reiterate it now for your listeners. Not one single business in Arizona will be taxed by Prop 208. Prop 208 only taxes individuals, wealthy individuals in the top 1% of incomes. A lot has been said how this is going to hurt mom and pop businesses. The median income for most small businesses in Arizona is about $48,000 a year. So your typical small business is not going to raise anywhere near enough to be impacted by the Prop 208 surcharge. So what Senate Bill 1783 does is it really just tries to give a workaround for these wealthy people who are making more than $500,000 a year or more. Many of them make, multi-million dollars a year or more, so that they can shield some of their income from the Prop 208 surcharge. It's not what Arizonans wanted when they voted for Prop 208. We also think that there's a voter protection case that can be made, and we are making in court. It's important to do this referendum to uphold the will of the voters, to get the signatures to block that bill and the other 2 bills from going into effect.
Right, because that with the Prop 208 funds, the only people who would be paying those under the Citizens Initiative that passed would be individuals making more than $250,000 or couples making more than $500,000. And my husband and I have both had small businesses, and we never made anywhere near $250,000, although we considered them successful. It was just shocking how many Republicans got up during debate and said that the proposition lied to the voters about small businesses. And it's like, no, this was personal income tax, people, come on. But that rhetoric was out there over and over and over again. The other thing that these referendum go after is they go after the flat tax. Isn't that correct?
Yes, so that's the biggest of the three in terms of a tax cut. It's about a $1.5 billion tax cut every year, meaning we will lose $1.5 billion of tax revenue every year. It overwhelmingly benefits the richest Arizonans, as I said. It's very similar to what they did in Kansas back in around 2012, 2013. Our governor, Governor Ducey, said when he was running for office that he wanted to get our income tax as close to zero as possible. That's what they did in Kansas back in 2012. And I can tell you that, and anybody who's followed, it was a disaster in Kansas. It just destroyed their state budget. They had to have huge cuts to public education, to everything, really. It was across the board cuts because it just devastated their state budget. They weren't able to bring in the revenue that they were expecting, and it just hurt their economy. And so that is what's going to happen if we allow this flat tax to go into effect, because if we cut $2 billion out of our revenue stream, the only thing to do in economic downturns is to cut. And so it's going to impact schools, it's going to impact, healthcare, all the things that we care about. And so that's why all three of these referendums, we think are education referendums, because it's going to impact our schools regardless of what happens with Prop 208. It's going to impact our ability to invest in education or anything else that people want to see investments in going forward. And so it's really important that we get the signatures to stop these things from going into effect. It's our future of our state, really, that's on the line.
It is definitely the future of our state. I think the flat tax is so economically dangerous. We really fought hard against the flat tax and against that alternative tax for small businesses, the one that you were just speaking of, that 1783. But the flat tax in particular, I mean, when we were debating that, Majority Leader Toma, whose bright idea the flat tax was this time around, the Republicans have proposed it before in Arizona over the last 10 years, and it has always gone down. But, this time it passed. Toma told us multiple times on the floor of the House to stop asking him about Kansas, because he said that, yes, they had the guts to pass the flat tax, but not the guts to pass the spending cuts that were needed later. And that's why they repealed it. So it was just shocking. We are riding high right now. As you pointed out at the beginning of the show, we are at we had $2 billion in income in January. A lot of it was the money that we got from the feds. People weren't evicted. They were allowed to keep their homes. They were allowed to keep buying things. The people who were office workers who didn't really miss a beat and just went from working in an office to working at home, they were buying stuff online. The economy was better than what was predicted during the pandemic. They thought 2021 was going to be bleak. And so the idea that, when we have the money, they just, in my opinion, throw it away in these tax cuts rather than investing it in education or access to care or other things that the people of Arizona definitely need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Rep. Toma said it all when he said that. I mean, that is the next step, is you do the big tax cuts and then you cut the things that people care about after that. That's very much intentional. And I think, when people talk about, well, we're just going to flip the legislature and flip the governor in 22 and that'll be okay, they should know that, the whole idea behind passing these tax cuts is, I think, people see that they are going to lose power, but this is going to cripple the next legislature and the next governor that come in. So if you do elect a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, they're not going to have the ability to do a lot of their policy priorities, because they're going to have to focus on cutting, because the revenue has already been cut permanently. And so, if they want to invest in education, they want to invest in children's health care, it's going to be very difficult to do if these tax cuts are put into place, because they're just so hard to reverse later.
Yes, I totally agree with you. We're just about out of time, but do you have anything you want to add on this topic? Encouragement for people to go out and sign or volunteer?
Right. Yeah. We have until, as you mentioned, September 28th. So we need people out there getting these signatures. We can get this done. We have shown in the past, under the most difficult circumstances, we launched Prop 208 back in February of 2020, not knowing that we had a pandemic coming down the road 2 weeks later, that people said we were not going to be able to get our signatures, but we did. People said we couldn't pass it at the ballot, but we did. People said that you weren't going to withstand the legal challenges that came afterwards. Let me tell you, even with the Supreme Court's decision, where a lot of people think that it's not going to work out, I actually have a lot of confidence that Prop 208 is going forward, and it's going to have a very long life. But we need to make sure we get these signatures to make sure that we get all the revenue that is promised from Prop 208. So that's why it's just so critically important that we're upholding the will of the voters, we're getting these signatures, and we can get all three of these referendums on the ballot to stop these tax cuts from going into effect.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's extremely important work, and I know that there are, people like me and my husband. We were collecting signatures in 2018. It was a miracle that you guys got that done during the pandemic. It was not a miracle that it passed, as far as I'm concerned. Everybody that I asked if they wanted to sign that or the outlawed dirty money, everybody signed it. It's disgusting what the Republicans did to Prop 208 in this session, and I wish you all the luck in the world and all the signatures you need, and thank you so much. My second guest for today is Eric Kramer. He is a resident of Pine Top, Arizona, and the director and treasurer of Arizona Deserves Better. This group is sponsoring the 3 voting rights referenda that are trying to get on the November 2022 ballot. All 6 referenda, the 3 education-related ones and the 3 anti-voter suppression ones, need more than 118,000 valid signatures by September 28 to stop these bad bills from becoming law and to let the voters decide. During the 2020 election season, Eric was involved in Northeast Arizona Democrats. They employed volunteers to register hundreds, if not thousands, of people in northern Arizona. They were instrumental in bringing out the vote. Today, he's going to tell us about their voter registration efforts and why he is instrumental in trying to protect voting rights in the state of Arizona. Eric, thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for having me. I'd just like to say that the overall overriding concern is that if anybody is denied the right to vote, we are all less free. That's very important. As you mentioned, we worked very hard on the reservations in Arizona. The increase in native vote in the 2020 election was 8 times our margin of victory in Arizona. So I feel very strongly that we shouldn't be messing around with the rights of people to vote, because it does really make a difference. You mentioned we have 3 bills that we're putting up for referendum. SB 1485, the legislature is attacking the permanent early voting list. More than 80% of the people in Arizona use this method to vote, to get their early ballots. And it's precisely why the legislature is attacking it, because it is so successful. They have a complicated formula about who they can purge from this list. It's more arcane than you could imagine. If you happen to go to the polls and vote on election day, that's a black mark against your voting record as far as SB 1485 is concerned. So the whole point is to create confusion, people not knowing how to vote, where to vote, all of this attempt to undermine American democracy. And we really need to stop. HB 2569 essentially defunds elections. We've talked to the county recorders. They have received private grants to run their operations. If they weren't able to accept these private grants, they wouldn't have the money to do voter registration, to put these drop boxes out in remote areas so people can return their ballots. They wouldn't be able to buy the tabulation machines they need to count the ballots, and also to hire the workers that they've hired to run successful and honest and timely elections. And of course, the legislature doesn't want us to have good and fair elections. So this is one attempt they've made to, again, mess up our election process. And finally, there is the SB 1819, which is just a weird grab bag of terrible things that they could think of to try to mess up the elections. If you can believe it, they signal single out Arizona game and fish for a special role in voter registration. You might ask, if these people are issuing duck stamps or counting how many trout people catch, why would they have anything to do with voter registration? And the answer is, of all of the agencies in state government, game and fish probably has the least contact with Native Americans. So the legislature picked them to be a lead agency in voter registration because they think their constituency is more right-wing than most agencies within the state. Other pieces of this bizarre bill would put invisible ink on the ballots. There's a concern that this invisible ink uniquely identifying the ballots could allow these cyber ninjas and others to actually figure out how people voted, a complete violation of the Arizona Constitution's guarantee of the secret ballot. And of course, this bill creates more of these kinds of cyber ninja audits of the voting databases, all of that sort of thing. Another bizarre thing is it blocks the Secretary of State from going to court to defend Arizona's election laws. And then miraculously, this very important provision, which they had to enact, disappears as soon as Katie Hobbs's term ends, so that in case they win the Secretary of State's election the next round, this wouldn't apply to them. So it's just a grab bag of everything bizarre and crazy that they could possibly think of. We need to get, as you mentioned, 118,000 signatures for each of these measures to get them on the ballot. We have a website, ArizonaDeservesBetter.com. I think right now we list 56 events around the state where people can go and get their signatures in on these. We will also, I think at all of our events, have the 3 education bills that you mentioned earlier. They will all be there. And finally, we have an initiative, a little different than a referendum, but an initiative called Stop Dark Money, and people can sign that as well. When you go there, it'll take about 10 minutes to sign everything to save American democracy. It's certainly worth 10 minutes. We will give you a little sticker that says, I signed all 7. An important part of success in this is not only for you to go there, but invite your friends and neighbors to come with you to get as many signatures as we can. 118,000 signatures in a state of 7 million people is not all that many, but it's a very short timeline we have. We would really appreciate all the help we can get, and we appreciate all of our hardworking volunteers who are out in every corner of the state getting this job done.
That's great. I'm glad that you gave us the website, and it's so exciting to hear that there are so many events. I know that there are people down here in Tucson that are organizing events. People are even having house parties. I have a friend who's a precinct committee person, and she said that she made a little flyer and gave it to 110 of her neighbors and said that she had all the 7 petitions at her house, and she's inviting her neighbors over to sign. And so people are doing this safely. I wanted to have you and David Luhan, who was talking about the education referenda, on this podcast because I think it's really important to get the word out about why this is necessary. All 6 of these referenda are aimed at some of the most extreme legislation that the Republicans passed with only Republican votes. Democrats fought hard against these. We tried to tell them, people are going to fight this. People don't want you to take over their voting rights. They don't want you to defund public education either. What are you talking about? And so I think it's really important work. I wanted to ask you a question about the game and fish angle. I remember when that was first brought up. So does that mean that they're going to be registering voters wherever they sell those licenses, like at big box stores that are famous for selling lots of guns and bullets?
I think that is the idea. If the legislature would have had its way, they would have turned voter registration over completely to the NRA, but they decided they couldn't do that. And so game and fish was probably the next best thing.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is I was shocked at the hubris of the Republicans when they decided to take away the duties and capabilities, or some of them, of the Secretary of State, and then also to hamper the county election departments and the county recorders. I mean, this business of taking away those access to grants for the county recorders, if they don't want them to use grant money, perhaps they should fully fund the services, right?
They would not do that in any circumstance. They would not pay for voter registration. They do not want the people of Arizona to vote. And that's just the way the legislature is. I'd just like to especially thank the people from Tucson. They are certainly leading the effort in Pima County. They're doing a great job. Maricopa County, of course, is very important. We have a lot of people there, and they are really getting out and getting after it. Our friends up in Coconino County are doing just an absolutely wonderful job. They have committed to getting 15,000 signatures. Coconino County is a big county, but it's not one of the most populous in the state. Yavapai County, known for being a little bit pink, if not red, is working very hard, and they are bringing in an awful lot of signatures. And we have people that are working hard on the Navajo reservation, on the Apache reservations, and just everywhere. Democrats are coming together to get this done, and we're very thankful to all of them, but perhaps to the folks in Tucson the most.
Well, I know that I have a lot of friends who were working on this, and as you said, they're collaborating on all six of the referenda and adding the citizens initiatives. There's the Stop Dark Money one, but there's others coming up. There's another Healthcare Rising one. There's a Pima County Justice Citizens Initiative. So that'll be a future podcast, but I'm so glad that everybody's collaborating, because all six of these referenda are extremely important, especially when you look at the voting rights attacks are nationwide. It's not just the Arizona Republicans that are trying to suppress the vote. It is Republicans nationwide trying to suppress the vote. And the effect of a lot of these is suppressing it among communities of color, as you pointed out with the Navajos. And so and also, the Pebble purges, it's disproportionately going to hurt certain groups. It would also hurt independent voters, so it cuts across lots of different groups that don't vote regularly, or perhaps will drop their ballot off at the polling place on election day rather than mailing it. They'll break some kind of little rule that's going to put them in the lane to get knocked off with a pebble, and that's just not fair. It shouldn't be more complicated to vote. It should be easier to vote. And so I was wondering if you had a comment regarding what's going on at the national level with the We the People Act. It would be really nice if the Congress passed that. That would save us a lot of trouble, because it would halt these bad bills that the Republicans have passed down here.
It would be really good if we could get national legislation. That is one of the ways where we could get some sort of remedy, but it's blocked by the filibuster. I think if we elect a different Congress, we could get this done, but I think for right now, we're blocked on the federal legislation aspect of it. Another place where we're currently blocked, I'm afraid, is in the courts. Just as an example, we had a practice in Arizona where if you lived out in a remote area and you wanted to get your ballot turned in, you could give it to a friend or neighbor, and they could drop off the ballots, put them in the mail, or they could take them to the voting location, or whatever, to get them turned in. And the legislature saw this as an attempt by people to vote, and they didn't like people voting. So they passed this law that it's against the law to touch these ballots to help people by bringing them in. We fought that in court for 6 years. We won at many, many levels along the way, from the Arizona all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. But ultimately, after 6 years of legal wrangling, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the people of Arizona. And so now we don't have that capability to help people turn in their ballots. So it's comes down to right now, referendums are the way we have to stop these incursions into voter suppression. And that's why we really need to get these signatures collected.
I totally agree with you, and I support your efforts. And it is really, really important. I wish we could get rid of the filibuster. I mean, I think voter suppression is the number one reason to get rid of the filibuster, as far as I'm concerned. People across the country will not be voting in the ways they did in 2020 if all these laws stand. So I am an optimist on that. Maybe I'm being silly, but I'm an optimist on getting something done. And in the meantime, you're right. The thing that we've got to do is the referendums.
Absolutely. Well, just again, if you want to get the signatures in, go to ArizonaDeservesBetter.com, look up a event or a location near you. If you want to help circulate the petitions, many of these events have petitions where you can check them out and get your friends and neighbors to sign them. When you go to sign, grab 2 or 3 other people and bring them with you. We need all of the help you can give us, and we're grateful for it.
That's great. I also believe that, at least down here in Pima County, the Pima County Democratic Party headquarters has all of the petitions, including the citizens' initiatives and a lot of candidate petitions to sign. So if somebody wants to do something all in one spot, the Pima County Democratic headquarters has that, and it's pretty convenient down here in Midtown if you're local to Tucson. So anyway, that's the show for today. I want to thank you, Eric Kramer, and also David Luhan, for joining me and explaining all the good work that you're doing and all of the things that we have to get our signatures on in the next few weeks. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thanks so much for tuning in to A View from the Left Side today. If you enjoyed the show, please consider liking this podcast on social media and becoming a subscriber. This is Representative Pam Powers Hanley signing off. Until next time, please take care of yourself, stay healthy, and stay vigilant.